The engine coughed once, then again, then fell silent, and in the space between one breath and the next, Mark understood they were already too low. The radio screaming static, the mountains rushing upward instead of away, Evan shouting his name from behind, the controls stiff under frozen hands, no time to think, no time to pray. Only the brutal clarity that this flight was ending here, in the white emptiness, far from maps, far from help, where survival would not begin after the crash, but during it. The plane hit the ground sideways, skidding across packed snow and frozen brush, metal screaming for only a second before silence crushed everything that followed. Mark's head snapped forward, his hands locked around the controls even after they stopped meaning anything. The world outside the windshield spinning once, then settling into white stillness. For several long breaths, he didn't move, afraid that motion would wake pain he wasn't ready to face, afraid the plane might slide again, or split, or sink into something worse than snow. But nothing happened. Only the wind pushing gently against the fuselage, testing it, patient and cold. "Evan," Mark said, forcing his voice out before fear could thicken it. "Answer me." A pause, too long, then a strained reply from behind him. "I'm here. I'm awake. I can't get up." Mark turned in his seat slowly, carefully, every movement measured. Evan was slumped against the side, breathing fast, his face tight with effort. Not panic yet, just the sharp focus of someone trying not to make things worse. "Stay still," Mark said, already unbuckling. "Don't try anything." The date barely mattered now, but it was February 1984, northern Alaska. A routine charter flight meant to hop between two frozen points on a map, carrying survey equipment and quiet assumptions. The kind of flight no one remembered afterward, until the engine failed without warning, without explanation, leaving them low and boxed in by mountains that did not care how skilled the pilot was. Mark checked the radio out of instinct, static. He tried again. Nothing but noise. The compass trembled uselessly. The instruments looked like props from another life. Outside there were no landmarks, no road cuts, no smoke trails, only endless white, broken by dark trees, too far apart to promise shelter. Cold seeped upward from the floor immediately. Not sharp, not dramatic, but confident, as if it knew it would win eventually. Mark understood then that the crash had not decided anything yet. It had only asked the first question, and the answer would depend on choices made while fingers were stiff, time unclear, and help very far away. Behind them, the wind erased the marks of their arrival, and the mountains waited, unmoving. Mark forced himself to think in steps, not outcomes, because outcomes were too large and too cold to hold in his head. He checked Evan first, kneeling beside him, keeping movements slow. The cabin tilted slightly, the floor uneven. Evan's leg pinned at an angle that made Mark tighten his jaw, not from what he saw, but from what it meant. "Can you feel your feet?" Mark asked, calm on purpose. "Don't move, just tell me." "Yes," Evan said after a breath. "Both of them. It hurts if I try to shift." "Then don't," Mark replied, already pulling off his gloves, the cold biting instantly. "We'll leave it for now." He knew better than to rush, knew that doing something just to feel useful was how people made things worse. Instead, he took inventory, the way instructors drilled into him years ago. Fuel smell faint, but not growing. No fire, no smoke. The cabin intact enough to matter. Supplies in the rear, food crates strapped down, emergency kit still wedged under the seat. Outside, the wind rose and fell like breathing, snow hissing against aluminum. Mark opened the door just enough to look. The cold punched in immediately, sharp and total, stealing heat in seconds. He shut it again and exhaled slowly. This wasn't a place you stepped into without reason. "We're not walking," Evan said suddenly, reading his silence. "Right?" Mark didn't answer right away, because answers mattered, and lies mattered more. "Not today," he said finally. "Not in this weather." The daylight was already thinning. Not dark yet, but fading fast. The low winter sun sliding behind the mountains, stretching shadows across the snow. Mark knew what that meant. Temperatures would drop hard once the light went, and the plane, broken as it was, still mattered. It was shelter, visibility, a shape rescuers could find if anyone came looking. He found the emergency radio in the back, pulled the antenna up, turned the dial slowly, static, then a faint crackle that raised his pulse. Then nothing again. He tried different angles, different frequencies, holding the antenna against the window, against the frame, against hope itself. But the mountains swallowed everything. Evan watched him closely, not asking questions yet, conserving energy, which Mark respected. "We'll wait the night," Mark said, more to the situation than to Evan. "Keep the heat as long as we can. Eat small, drink less than you want, sleep in shifts." "And if no one comes?" Evan asked quietly. Mark looked out at the white through the windshield, at the way the land offered no direction, no promise, only distance. "Then we make another plan," he said, knowing already that plans would cost them something, one way or another. The cold pressed closer as the light died, and the first night began, long before either of them was ready. The cold came quietly, not as a shock, but as pressure, steady and deliberate, slipping through seams, through boots, through the thin confidence of metal walls. Mark woke every few minutes to check the gauges, the fuel, Evan's breathing, counting seconds in his head because clocks felt unreliable now. At some point in the night the wind changed, no longer brushing the fuselage but striking it, rocking the plane just enough to make Evan tense, his hand gripping the seat frame, teeth clenched, not from pain alone but from the sound, because moving metal meant instability, and instability meant unknowns. "Still with me?" Mark asked, leaning close so his words wouldn't carry panic. "Yeah," Evan whispered, his voice dry. "Hard to tell if I slept or just closed my eyes." Mark nodded, even though Evan couldn't see it. The engine was off now. Heat long gone. The cabin holding only what warmth their bodies could offer. He layered spare jackets over Evan first, then himself, knowing fairness had no place here. Somewhere before dawn, a sound cut through the wind, faint but wrong, not natural, not steady. Mark froze, listening, heart tightening. It came again, distant, uneven, like something moving across the snow, not fast, not slow, just persistent. Evan heard it too, his eyes open now, alert despite exhaustion. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "I do," Mark said, already reaching for the flashlight, angling it through the windshield, sweeping the white outside in slow arcs, trees, drifts, shadows stretching and collapsing. Nothing solid, nothing human. The sound faded, then returned farther off, circling, testing. Mark realized how alone noise could make you feel out here, how the mind reached for patterns when certainty disappeared. When dawn finally came, it was thin and pale, barely earning the name, revealing what night had hidden. The plane resting at the edge of a shallow valley, trees spaced wider than Mark liked. No ridgeline nearby, no clear path out, just snow that looked firm until it wasn't. Mark stepped outside for the first time since the crash, the cold hitting hard enough to steal breath, the silence immense. He planted his boots carefully, testing each step. The snow broke under his weight more than once, reminding him how easy it would be to twist, to fall, to lose options. He scanned the horizon slowly, methodically, and then he saw it, far off against the white. Something dark and vertical that had not been there in his memory, a line too straight to be natural. His pulse jumped before he could stop it. A tower, maybe, or a marker, distant but real. He turned back toward the plane, toward Evan, already knowing that hope, once seen, was dangerous, because now they would have to decide whether to reach for it or stay where survival still barely made sense. Mark didn't tell Evan about the tower immediately, not because he wanted to hide hope, but because hope made people rush, and rushing out here was how you lost fingers, legs, or the ability to think straight. He climbed back inside the cockpit, closed the door carefully, waited until his breathing slowed, then pointed through the windshield, keeping his voice level. "See that dark line out there, left side of the valley? It might be a radio marker or a maintenance tower. If it is, it means something human still exists out there." Evan squinted, leaning forward slightly despite the effort it cost him. "How far?" he asked, and Mark paused, because distance in snow was a lie. "A few miles, maybe more. We don't measure it in miles, we measure it in time." They ate little, forcing food down because they knew they had to. Dry crackers, a strip of preserved meat split in half, one careful sip of water each, enough to quiet the mouth but not enough to feel satisfied. Then Mark started laying things out on the seats: emergency blankets, flares, a small shovel, rope, a hatchet, a bright orange signal panel, turning chaos into something that looked like a plan. Evan watched quietly, then said, "You're getting ready to leave." "I'm getting ready to choose," Mark answered, because the words mattered. "If we stay, we gamble someone is already looking. That they find us in time. If we go, we gamble on weather, distance, and on carrying you." Evan swallowed and looked away, not arguing, just absorbing what that meant. Outside, the sky shifted again, the light flattening, clouds sliding low and fast from the west. The kind of ceiling that meant snow was coming sooner, not later. Mark stepped outside to read the wind, stamped a wide X in the snow near the fuselage, fixed the orange panel where it would catch the eye from above. And that was when he saw them. Tracks, a single set, angling across the valley. Shallow, half filled with drift. Not fresh, but not ancient either. The stride uneven, correcting itself, like someone tired or unsure. He crouched, traced the edge of one print with his glove, felt his stomach tighten, because tracks meant someone else had been here, and if they had walked away, it meant walking away was possible, but it also meant they hadn't come back. When he climbed inside again, Evan saw his face and didn't wait. "What did you see?" "Tracks," Mark said, keeping his voice steady. "One person." Evan exhaled slowly, relief flickering and dying just as fast, because the silence outside didn't change. No voices, no movement, only wind. The clouds thickened while they watched, the valley losing contrast, the tower on the horizon fading in and out of view. And Mark understood they were running out of the only thing they couldn't store, a clear window to move, a day that stayed readable. "We go before the storm closes," he said quietly, "or we don't go at all." They didn't leave immediately, because immediate decisions were loud and sloppy. Mark waited until the wind settled into something predictable, until Evan's breathing slowed, until the light held steady long enough to trust. Then he braced himself and began the hardest part, moving Evan without turning effort into damage. He slid the emergency blanket under him, cinched the rope into a harness that would distribute weight instead of fighting it, tested every knot twice, then a third time, not because he doubted the rope, but because doubt crept in everywhere else. When they opened the door, the cold rushed in with authority. Not sharp, not dramatic, just complete. It stole words from the mouth and strength from the knees. Mark stepped out first, planted his boots, tested the snow. It held for a step, then dipped, reminding him that the ground here lied politely until it didn't. He looked back at Evan. "We go slow," he said. "If anything feels wrong, we stop." Evan nodded, jaw tight, conserving everything. They moved in short pulls, Mark leaning forward, Evan sliding over packed snow on the blanket, the rope biting into Mark's shoulders, distance shrinking into meters, meters shrinking into effort, the plane behind them growing smaller with each pause, a shape that already felt like another life. Mark forced himself to look back every few minutes, to memorize the way the fuselage cut into the white, to keep an anchor in his head. Half an hour in, the weather shifted again. Light dimming, clouds thickening faster than before, snow beginning not as flakes but as fine grain, hissing across the surface, erasing edges. Evan noticed it too. "It's closing," he said, not asking. Mark answered by leaning harder, because words wasted heat. They reached the shallow dip where the tracks had passed. Mark stopped, studied the ground. The impressions were almost gone now, softened into suggestion, but the direction held, angling toward a line of darker trees. He followed it because following something was better than inventing a path, even if that something belonged to a stranger. The trees swallowed sound, wind dropped, the world narrowed. Snow deepened without warning. Mark's legs burned. His breath fogged and froze on his collar. He counted steps to keep from counting fear. 20, stop, breathe. 20 more, stop again. Evan stayed silent, which worried Mark more than complaints. Then they heard it. A dull crack, far off but heavy. The sound of snow settling somewhere it shouldn't. Mark froze, listening. The forest held still. Then another sound followed, closer, the low whisper of snow sliding through branches. Not fast, not violent, but enough to change the ground. "We're not stopping here," Mark said, forcing movement, because stillness under loaded slopes was a gamble he wouldn't take. They pushed on until the trees thinned again, until the tower came back into view. Closer now, taller, undeniably real. And for a moment, hope rose, sharp and dangerous. Then the wind surged. The snow thickened into a wall, and the tower vanished as if someone had turned it off. Mark stopped, chest heaving, looked at Evan, then at the white ahead, and understood that reaching something you could see was one thing, reaching something you could no longer see was another. The storm didn't ask what they preferred, it simply arrived, and with it, the next decision they couldn't avoid. They didn't have time to debate. The storm removed that option first. Wind slammed into them from the open side of the valley, snow thickening from grain into sheets, visibility collapsing to a few body lengths. The world shrinking until only Mark's next step existed. He turned them slightly downslope. Not toward the tower, but away from the exposed line, because direction meant less than survival in the next 10 minutes. The ground changed under his boots without warning, firm snow turning hollow, then giving way, his leg dropped to the knee, wrenching his balance, the rope snapped tight. Evan lurched, gasping. Mark dug in with both hands, heart hammering, forcing stillness until the slope stopped trying to move. He pulled himself free inch by inch, breath loud inside his hood. "We're okay," he said, more command than comfort. "We keep low." They found a stand of trees tighter than the rest, trunks close enough to cut the wind. Mark dragged Evan behind the thickest cluster, stamping out a shallow wall with his boots, using the shovel with slow, brutal swings, snow piling into something that barely deserved the word shelter. He draped the emergency blanket over branches, anchored it with rope and weight, creating a low, dark pocket where the wind broke and the noise softened. Inside, time bent, minutes stretched, seconds vanished. Evan shivered despite layers, teeth chattering. Mark pressed close, sharing heat because there was nothing else to share. He forced Evan to sip water, counted swallows, watched his eyes, watched for confusion, for the drift that meant cold was winning. The sound returned then, clearer now. Not the crack of settling snow, but a deep, rolling hush, distant yet constant. Mark knew it without wanting to. Wind loading the slopes above, snow moving in slow waves where gravity waited. He felt the trees vibrate faintly, needles shedding white in small avalanches of their own. "We can't stay long," Mark said, low and steady. "This is only a pause." Evan nodded once, jaw tight. "I know." The wind screamed again, closer this time, snow pouring through gaps, erasing the shallow wall as fast as Mark built it. He checked the compass, needle wobbling, useless for precision, useful only for keeping panic from choosing. He aligned them by the slope instead, moving where the ground eased, where trees grew thicker, trading direction for cover. They left the shelter and immediately the world tried to take them back. Mark leaned into the rope, Evan sliding, silent now, conserving everything. They moved by feel more than sight, hands on bark, boots testing before committing, every step negotiated. Then, through the noise, a new sound cut clean. 3 sharp tones, metallic, repeating. Mark froze, head snapping up, listening. It came again, faint but real. A bell, a tower in the wind, close enough to matter, far enough to lie. Hope surged, dangerous and bright. Mark forced it down, tightened his grip, and moved, because standing still under a loaded sky was not hope, it was surrender. The storm thickened around them, but the sound held, and Mark understood the truth they hadn't spoken yet. Reaching the tower would not end this. It would only change the shape of what they still had to survive. The sound guided them more than sight. A thin metallic rhythm cutting through the wind. 3 tones repeating, vanishing, returning again. Mark followed it instinctively, angling across the slope instead of straight up, because straight lines in storms were traps. The snow thickened around their knees, then their thighs, each step a negotiation with gravity. The rope between them taut, Evan sliding in controlled inches, breathing shallow and steady. The tower emerged suddenly, not gradually. One moment there was only white. The next, a dark structure loomed out of it, skeletal and tall, guy wires humming under tension, ice clinging to metal like a second skin. The bell mounted high above swayed violently, striking its frame with every gust. Not a signal meant for people, just a warning to birds and weather. But to Mark it sounded like a clock. They reached the base and pressed in close, the metal blocking some of the wind. Not enough to be safe, but enough to think. Mark anchored the rope around a support, tested it, trusted it. Evan leaned back, eyes closed, letting his body rest without sleeping. Mark scanned the ground and found what he hadn't let himself expect. A narrow maintenance path, almost erased. A depression in the snow running down slope, curving away from the exposed ridge. "There's a way down," Mark said, keeping his voice low, as if the storm could hear decisions. "Not a road, but a path." Evan opened his eyes, focused. Down is good. They moved again, slower now, exhaustion making everything heavier. The path dipped into a shallow cut where snow piled deep but wind weakened. Trees grew tighter. The bell faded behind them, replaced by the softer sound of snow settling off branches. Mark counted steps to keep time from stretching. His legs shook with effort. His hands ached from gripping rope and bark. The storm followed, but less violently here. Visibility improved by inches, then feet. Shapes returned, the world becoming readable again, and with that came danger of a different kind. Confidence. Mark forced himself to stay cautious. The path crossed a frozen stream, ice hidden under drift. He tested it with the shovel, one step at a time. The surface groaned but held. Evan's weight dragged across without breaking through. On the far side, they found something that changed the air between them. A small structure half buried against the slope. Not the tower, not rescue, but a maintenance shed. Metal walls bowed, door rimed with ice. Mark felt his chest tighten. Shelter meant pause. Pause meant warmth. Warmth meant mistakes if they weren't careful. He cleared the door with shaking hands, forced it open, the inside dark and cramped, but out of the wind. Evan sagged as they got him inside, relief hitting hard and fast. Mark didn't let it linger. He sealed the door, reinforced it with snow, checked Evan again, fingers, toes, clarity, all present, barely. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rake the walls, the bell distant now, muffled by terrain. Mark understood what the shed really was, not safety, but a checkpoint, a place to survive the next hours, not the next outcome. Outside, the storm continued to erase choices, but inside, for the first time since the crash, time slowed just enough for Mark to realize something unsettling. The shed wasn't empty because no one used it. It was empty because someone had left, and whatever decision drove them out into this weather was still waiting somewhere ahead. They didn't sleep, not really. The shed held back the wind, but not the cold. And cold turned rest into something shallow and fragmented. Mark kept checking Evan, touching his shoulder, asking simple questions: name, date, where they were. Evan answered each time, slower than before, but accurate, which mattered more than strength. Outside, the storm began to change, not ending but shifting, the wind lowering into a constant pressure, snow falling heavier, quieter, packing itself against the walls until the shed creaked softly, as if it were thinking. Mark understood that waiting too long here carried its own risk. A buried door, a roof loaded past what it could hold, shelter becoming a trap. At what felt like morning, though light barely changed, Mark cracked the door and read the world again. Visibility had improved just enough to see shapes, trees, slope. The path continuing downslope and bending out of sight. And something else, closer than he expected. Tracks, fresher than the ones near the plane, crossing the path and heading the same direction they needed to go. He studied them carefully, the stride uneven, dragging slightly on one side, the pattern familiar in a way he didn't like. Not panic, not running, but persistence. Someone moving while exhausted. Someone who had already decided stopping was worse. When he closed the door, Evan saw his face and understood before Mark spoke. Someone else made it this far, Evan said. Yes, Mark answered. And they kept going. They left the shed before the snow could change its mind. Mark rechecked the rope, tightened Evan's layers, forced a few calories down both of them, then pulled the door shut behind them, covering it with snow so it wouldn't stand out, instinct telling him that empty shelters were noticed for a reason. The path narrowed as it dropped, trees tightening, ground steepening. Mark moved sideways at times, using trunks as anchors, snow breaking away in slabs no bigger than doors, but enough to slide underfoot. Evan's weight pulled at the rope, constant and patient. Mark leaned into it, legs burning, breath fogging thick. They crossed the tracks again near a bend, and this time Mark noticed something new. A stumble, a place where the person had gone down to one knee, then pushed back up. The mark of hands in the snow, fingers spread. Mark felt a chill unrelated to temperature, because that meant effort, and effort meant cost. Then they heard it. Not wind, not snow, but water, faint and hollow, the sound of a stream fighting winter. Mark's pulse jumped. Water meant lower elevation, trees thinning, maybe a road cut somewhere below. It also meant ice, thin and deceptive, the kind that ended plans quietly. They reached the stream minutes later, narrow but fast, dark water sliding under broken ice, the crossing no more than 3 meters, but the bank steep, the margin for error gone. Mark tested it with the shovel, ice cracking, shifting, holding only in patches. "We don't rush this," Mark said, even as the cold pressed closer. He anchored the rope to a tree, stepped onto the ice, weight low, every movement slow. The surface groaned but didn't fail. He reached the far bank, set his stance, then pulled Evan across in inches. Evan's breath sharp, controlled, ice flexing beneath him, the stream whispering beneath everything. When they reached the far side, both of them paused, not from relief, but from the understanding that they were committed now, because behind them the storm had erased the shed completely, and ahead of them the tracks led on, down into terrain they couldn't see yet, but would have to accept. Mark followed the tracks without saying it out loud, because at this point, choosing to follow another survivor's path was less about trust and more about admitting that none of them were meant to be alone out here, not for long. The tracks led them into a narrowing cut where the land folded inward, trees thinning, rock pressing closer, the stream running louder now, impatient. Mark felt the temperature change before he understood why. Cold pooling low, heavier, the kind that settled and stayed. He adjusted their angle again, keeping them just above the waterline, because ice near moving water lied better than anywhere else. They found the remains of a camp without meaning to. A shallow scrape in the snow beneath a leaning spruce. Branches snapped and stacked badly. A piece of plastic half buried. The corner of a ration wrapper stiff as glass. Evan noticed it first. "They stopped here," he said, voice quiet, not hopeful. Mark nodded, crouched, read the signs the way you read a story backward. One night, maybe two. Someone conserving energy, then leaving again before the storm finished deciding. What unsettled Mark was not the absence of a body, but the direction of departure. Downhill, yes, but angled toward the stream, toward risk, which meant the person had chosen speed over safety, or had lost the ability to choose at all. They moved on, because stopping invited thoughts that froze faster than skin. The sound of water grew sharper, then changed pitch suddenly. Mark stopped hard, raised a hand, listened. The stream dropped ahead, not far. A fall, small but steep enough to break ice into chaos. The path funneled toward it, forcing a choice. Cross above the drop on thinning ice, or climb the bank where rock was exposed and snow barely held. Mark chose the bank, drove the shovel into the slope, tested holds, pulled himself up, then hauled Evan sideways, inch by inch, Evan's breath tight, focused, the rope creaking softly, snow sloughing off in sheets that vanished into the dark below. When they reached stable ground, Mark leaned his forehead into the bark of a tree and counted to 10, not for rest, but to keep the shaking out of his hands. Beyond the drop, the land opened unexpectedly, a long, gentle grade cutting through the trees, and with it, something Mark hadn't allowed himself to imagine. A line, straight and wrong against the natural curves, a road, barely visible, plowed once, long ago, now reclaimed by snow, but unmistakable. Evan saw it too, disbelief breaking through exhaustion. "That's a road," he said, and Mark felt the danger in the word, because roads promised endings, and endings made people careless. They reached it slowly, carefully, stepping onto compacted snow that held differently, the surface uneven but firm enough to matter. Mark scanned left, then right. Tire ruts faint, direction unclear. But the road itself meant connection, meant somewhere else existed beyond this moment. Then Mark saw the final sign, half buried near the edge, a marker post bent low, letters scraped by ice, only two readable, MP, milepost, proof that this place was counted, measured, part of a system that expected people to pass through and survive. Behind them, the storm closed ranks again, swallowing the path they had taken. Ahead, the road curved out of sight into trees and shadow. Mark tightened the rope, looked at Evan, and said the thing he hadn't said yet. "We're not done," because roads didn't mean rescue. They meant exposure, distance, and the last stretch where mistakes were easiest to make. They turned downhill together, the sound of the stream fading behind them, replaced by silence that felt earned. And for the first time since the engine went quiet, Mark understood that survival now depended less on shelter and more on how long they could keep moving without believing the worst was already over. The road pulled them forward in a way the wilderness never had. Its curve gentle, almost kind. But Mark didn't trust it. He kept his pace slow, deliberate, because roads invited assumptions, and assumptions were how people collapsed 5 minutes from safety. The snow underfoot was packed harder here, uneven but consistent. Evan's weight dragged smoother now, which helped and hurt at the same time. Smoother meant faster. Faster meant mistakes if they let relief take over. They followed the road downhill, counting bends, watching the trees thin in places, then close again, the sky lightening almost imperceptibly. Not warmth, just visibility, enough to show them what waited ahead. And then they saw it. Not a building, not a vehicle, but a shape in the road, dark against white, unmoving. Mark stopped instantly, raised a hand. Evan felt the tension through the rope and looked up. "What is it?" he asked, voice tight. Mark didn't answer right away. He scanned the shoulders, the tree line, the slope above. then moved closer, one careful step at a time. The shape resolved into a pack, half buried, straps frozen stiff. Beside it, footprints ended abruptly, not turning back, not continuing, just stopping. Mark knelt, brushed snow aside, found a jacket folded strangely, placed, not dropped. Evan watched from the rope, already understanding. "They sat down," he said quietly. "Yes," Mark replied, and the word felt heavy, because sitting down meant choosing rest over motion, and out here that choice had consequences that didn't reverse. There was no body nearby, which made it worse, because it meant the person had stood again, had tried to move after rest failed them, had walked into snow without leaving a clear story behind. Mark felt the weight of it settle. Not fear, but urgency sharpened by proof. "We don't stop," Mark said firmly, louder now for both of them. "Not here, not for long." They left the pack where it was, a marker of what hesitation cost, and kept moving, the road dropping faster now, winding through a cut where trees opened suddenly. And then the sound reached them, faint but undeniable. An engine, distant, irregular, not wind, not imagination. Mark froze, heart hammering, listened. The sound came again, closer this time. Evan heard it too, his breath caught. "That's real," he said. "Yes," Mark answered, forcing calm, because excitement burned energy faster than cold. "But we don't run." They followed the sound through the final bend, and the world opened in front of them. A wide clearing, a maintenance yard half buried in snow. One vehicle parked crooked near a shed, exhaust drifting weakly from its pipe, a man standing beside it, back turned, struggling with a frozen door. Mark didn't shout, didn't wave. He moved into view slowly, raised one hand. The man turned, startled, eyes widening at the sight of them. Rope, blanket. Two figures emerging from white like something the storm hadn't finished erasing. "Hey," the man called, disbelief thick in his voice. "Where did you come from?" Mark stopped, finally let himself breathe. "From the sky," he said simply, and for the first time since the engine failed, the answer felt complete. Behind them, the road curved back into snow and silence, and Mark knew that survival didn't end at rescue. But this part did, marked not by celebration, but by the quiet understanding that every decision they'd made had mattered, and that one wrong pause, one false comfort, would have left them as just another shape half buried along a road no one remembered to check. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to read more survival stories.